I mean, Queen Victoria and Edward VII were very, very greedy. They were serious eaters. If you think breakfast was 12 dishes, lunch was 8 to 10 to 12 courses. Tea, which is the one thing that still remains to this day, that was cakes and biscuits and sandwiches and potted shrimps and eggs. And then dinner that was 12 to 14 courses.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. In Cooking and the Crown, royal recipes from Queen Victoria to King Charles III, Tom Parker Bowles, award-winning food writer, restaurant critic, and son of Queen Camilla, blends history, monarchy, and gastronomy to provide a fascinating window into the world of royal tastes and traditions as far back as Victorian times. On this episode, we hear about Tom's reporting on how the royal family really eats and dig into his long restaurant reviewing career. Lastly, we get his take on the food scene in London and talk about some unexpected places to find amazing food around the United Kingdom. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Tom Parker Bowles, welcome to This Is Taste. Great to meet you.
Great to meet you too, Matt. How really nice to be here.
Yeah, we were just chatting a little off mic about my admiration for your work, because I have admiration for your work as a restaurant critic covering not just London, but the United Kingdom. It's terrific.
Well, you're very kind to say so, but as we were saying, it is it's one of those jobs that people can't quite believe you have. You get to travel around the world and stuff, in my case, my fat tummy. It's, but then again, how could you, if it's like, the AJ Liebling who said that the first requisite of food writing, and I suppose restaurant criticism, is a healthy appetite. And I certainly got that. AJ
Liebling, that's a great reference. And I love the quote. And I think you're right. We have to be hungry as writers. We also have to work on deadline. What's the deadline like for you? Because you're writing every week.
Weekly. The deadlines, well, it's sort of, because I'm writing in a supplement rather than the actual paper, there's a sort of 3-week lead time.
Okay, good.
But, so you're not quite as current as, say, Giles Corran at the Times. But, deadlines, we all live on deadlines. The first thing when you're on your commission is something, because like, when's the deadline and how much per word?
Definitely.
But the deadline, I love deadlines. I can't, if someone says, will you write a piece about X, Y, or Z? If they don't give me a deadline, they're never going to get it, because, we thrive on deadlines.
Absolutely. So you've been reviewing for like 20 years, right?
20 years. I think about 12 years really as the dedicated reviewer at Mail on Sunday, and then 10 years before that of food writing. So it's sort of whether it's poacher turned gamekeeper or gamekeeper turned poacher. I'm not sure which way it goes.
Well, we can go both ways.
Yeah, but exactly. And that's the thing. As a food writer, first and foremost, of course, you get to know all the chefs. And then when you suddenly become a restaurant critic as well, then it can be, because we're very, like you guys are, very conscious of saying so-and-so's a friend, just so you're just very honest about things, and it's very important that.
And you're obviously recognizable, but anonymity is kind of dead in food writing. How do you approach your reviews? How do you walk into a restaurant? What are you looking for?
I'm the opposite. The language of hate is much richer than the language of like and love, and it is sometimes quite fun. I'm talking purely as writing to really do a really nasty stinker of a review. But my job, I feel, is to go and look for the best in restaurants, because restaurants, you don't open a restaurant to make money. You have to do the good restaurants are done by love and hard work. And if I swan in like some sort of smug restaurant critic on a bad night, and let's say that, I don't know, the head chef's gone off, and anyway, something goes wrong, and, I just wouldn't feel right about giving it a bad review, especially a family owned. It's different if it's a big corporation.
Yeah.
But I'd never go and personally sort of single out someone for bad service, or, I feel that I want to celebrate the best rather than go looking for fault.
Great point of view, and I think many critics share that. And I think when you're, working with a large city like London, there's so much good to write about, and I guess it's a matter of balancing against like the big shot chefs who maybe aren't rising to their own reputation. Is that when you find yourself writing negatively?
Definitely. I think there's a huge difference between American food criticism and British. And, you know this. And I think, the thing is, for a start, I used to have about 800 words. It's gone down to about 500 or 600. So it's quite a short review. People like Giles Corran at the Times, Jay Rayner at the Observer, Grace Dent at the Guardian. They have 1,200 words. it's quite difficult unless you're reviewing something that's so incredible or on the other side so awful. You've got to fill in other stuff apart from food. So, Giles is a very, very funny writer and really knows his stuff about food. But occasionally, like A.A. Gill used to do, it'd be 900 words about something nothing to do with food, usually being rude about something or someone. So it's almost sometimes humour as well as, whereas if you see your greats, and I look at sort of Pete Wells or I suppose he's just retired, as we said, but it's much more, you go 3 times, Gail Green, who's it?
Gail Green, yeah.
But, going in disguises. And I think that matters. There was a fantastic restaurant critic for the Sunday Times called Marina O'Loughlin.
Yeah, of course.
And she was the only one that no one knew what she looked like. So she was always shoved on the bad table but by the loos, and always got the sort of, and that really did give a taste of, so-called being treated, but I mean that it's a bad phrase, but we all have our great bylines by our things, so it's not very difficult. But you wouldn't really be recognised if you were going off to a tiny regional Szechuan restaurant or a Hunanese restaurant or a small Palestinian place, because the great thing about London is all these different communities, and we don't mean very much.
Such an incredible restaurant city, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. We'll get to your book as well, Cooking in the Crown. But Adrian Gill, you mentioned. Rest in peace.
Oh, one of the greats.
Yeah, talk about Adrian's work a little bit.
Adrian was the great A.A. Gill, and those were the days, I suppose, 20 years back, where Fame Asher at the Standard, A.A. Gill at the Times, they really could open and close a restaurant.
Yeah.
And it's because in those last 20 years we have the great democratization of food writing,
100.
which on the one hand is brilliant. You get lots of new voices who you wouldn't have heard before. I think it's fantastic having all sorts of different nationalities and everything. That's wonderful. It's not just the old boys and girls club, anymore, and that's a good thing. On the other hand, I do find that the things we learn at the time doing it, like having an editor, writing to length, I think sometimes the skills, or certainly the practical aspects of writing for a newspaper or magazine, writing to length, knowing about, how much you care about crafting your beginning and your payoff, and sometimes that's lost. But it's great that great writers with strong opinions and deep knowledge are coming through when they wouldn't perhaps have done it 30 years ago. That's a good thing.
I love that, the great democratization of food writing.
Yeah.
Well said. I've said it on the show before. Totally agree with you, Tom. You're in New York City for a few days on book tour. Where are you going to eat? What's on your list? What are you interested in checking out?
Well, New York is always, I'm quite boring when it comes to New York. When I sometimes come, there are lots of new cool restaurants, but I always go, because I'm old now and I like staying uptown a bit.
Yeah.
I always go to J.G. Mellon. I love J.G. Mellon's with such a passion. It's just a martini and a cheeseburger. It doesn't tell you how, what the cow's name was, what breed it was,
Right.
whether it was, you just get a cheeseburger and that's it. And, you sit and you pay cash. That's fantastic. And so today I want to go and try, and I want to know what you think. Hamburger America, is it called?
Yeah, of course.
What's it like?
George Moats, been on the show, friend of the show.
Yeah.
Tom, you got to go.
Yeah. So
you got to go. And I'd say you form your own opinion, but I think if you're into burgers and truly American food, you're going to have a great time.
And the ham and cheese sandwich apparently is a sort of secret there that everyone's been talking about. So I'm very excited. And then places like Minetta Tavern at night. I remember when that first opened. And, Keith's quite outspoken on Instagram. And sometimes he's very right about some people.
Yeah, totally agree.
But I remember when the meatpacking district was full of it was sort of
sketchy
creatures of the night, let's say it that way.
Sketchy, yeah.
It was lovely. It was really cool. It was the days of Twilo. So not that it was there, but anyway.
You went to Twilo?
Twilo.
You were a Twilo guy. I was more of like a tunnel guy personally. Back in the 90s.
Well, exactly. The 90s was fun here. It's always fun. In terms of, I still like going to New York to have uniquely New York things. So Kat says, I know it's a tourist cliche. I know that everyone films the pastrami being made, cut, but there's something about it that's very, they just get it right. That's why they've been going for that long. And you wouldn't find that anywhere else on earth.
Listen, I think it's one of the best pastrami's in the world. And I'll also go to Brick Lane when I'm in London and have bagels there.
Yes,
I'm sure some people would say that's touristy, but man, it's pretty freaking good.
Exactly. And I think the touristy, in terms of new things, my tastes have always been more towards, amazing Southern Thai or fantastic Hunanese food that you might find in Flushing, say, rather than in Manhattan. I remember years ago, I think it was the first barbecue I ever ate. It was at Virgil's in Times Square.
Of course.
And I bought the book and I was like, wow, this is American barbecue. And of course, then went to the South and said to everyone, went to the Carolinas and to this. And then I said, I had barbecue in New York. And of course, in those days, barbecue in New York was a joke, But that was very exciting. But New York there's always somewhere. There's a Szechuan place I'm desperate to try down in the West Village, Szechuan. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'm always looking, and I do trust the Pete Wells guys. I do a mixture of Time Out, Eater, New York Times, Friends.
Yep.
And just as much as a sort of, I love an old-fashioned French place than I do cutting edge. But I tend not to go for too many tasting menus.
Yeah, tastings, I think for a critic, they can kind of weigh you down a little bit.
They do. It's a tyranny of the tasting menu. You're stuck in there.
Yeah, we just wrote a great piece on Taste about the kind of rethinking of the tasting menu and how the tasting menu can actually be 3 courses now.
Yes.
It used to be called a prefix, but we'll call it a tasting menu.
Yeah,
we could talk all day about reviewing restaurants, but I want to get to your book. Now, talk about your access to The Crown when writing Cooking and the Crown, which is a terrific book. Great insight into I would call it the more modern, mid-modern history of cooking in the royal family and the food that's consumed. But what was your access like?
Well, 25 years of being a food writer and 25 years of utterly avoiding anything to do with royalty. Literally, occasionally I talk about my mum's roast chicken. Yeah. That would be it for obvious reasons. I was concentrating on strange foods or chili or English food or whatever. So this is my 9th book, and I thought, okay, after a quarter of a century, I've always found it fascinating, royal cooking, because whether you're in Thailand or India or China, Japan, royal cuisine, there's always been, to make a great world cuisine, you have to, I think, have a royal cuisine and a very vibrant country cuisine and the bourgeois in between. And about 20 years, my mother gave me a book called Royal Chef. And it was written by a guy called Gabriel Schumi, who's a Swiss chef, started under Queen Victoria when there were 45 people in the kitchen, and whole oxes were roasted on spits. And he moved his way up through the brigade, ending up, through Edward VII, George V, and ended up as royal chef to Queen Mary, who was George V's widowed wife. And it's fascinating. It gives you the insight of cooking these sort of intricate, foie gras stuffed quail.
You call it impossible food.
Well, it is impossible food because the whole point of the book, which we're going to do, is it's recipes that I can cook, easy recipes, cakes and biscuits and stuff that isn't very royal, but they ate. But impossible, like turtle soup. It starts with, take one fat, lively turtle. You flip it open, you cut it open. Dishes like that would take 18 hours to make. It would need a brigade of 45 people to make it. There was Queen Victoria and Edward VII were very, very greedy. They were serious eaters. If you think breakfast was 12 dishes, lunch was 8 to 10 to 12 courses. Tea, which is the one thing that still remains to this day, that was cakes and biscuits and sandwiches and potted shrimps and eggs. And then dinner that was 12 to 14 courses.
So dinner was still a pretty large meal as well.
And it was all a huge meal, lots of butter, lots of truffle, lots of foie gras. And again, of course, French food was always looked upon by the British, especially in Victorian and Edwardian days, as haute cuisine, the very best, the very finest. And of course, at the same time, Escoffier was there, in partnership. There were 2 rogues, really, Escoffier and Caesar Ritz. But, he created the Batterie de Cuisine. He created, that book, 400 Million Ways with Dover Sole, including everything with truffle. But, he was very important, obviously, Escoffier, and what he did to the French kitchen and, the master sauces and everything like that. And it was a really interesting time. So it's, the history side of the book is looking at impossible foods or cooking on an ocean wave or, the special relationship we'll talk to you about later. But yeah, it was a time of everyone ate a hell of a lot. Listen, they did a lot more exercise. There was less central heating. It was far less of a sedentary life, even if you were the queen or king. But Queen Victoria, for example, was a gobbler. And this is what our uncle said. So she, what would happen in the contemporary reports of royalty would be like, and the queen was wonderful. She has a rather dainty appetite. No, she didn't.
She loved to chow down.
She'd chow down.
Yeah.
And then she'd eat so quickly that the moment she had finished her plate, everyone else had to finish as well. Because so the moment she'd finished, she put a knife and fork down where it was. Everyone was whisked away.
How much flatulation is at the table during the Victorian era?
Imagine. I mean, I don't even want to know how much. I mean, you probably had to blame it on the dogs or something.
Right, the dogs or like, the people working there, I'm sure.
Yeah, but there was, and it was very formal. French. But what I found fascinating going through all the research and going back to your question about access is that a lot of the research was done in the Royal Archive, which is in the Round Tower of Windsor Castle. You're sitting in a 1,000-year-old.
Yeah.
But I was very conscious. Anyone writing a book, whether it's a biography or food, can apply. I wasn't pulling strings, and being a nepo middle-aged boy and, getting in there. That obviously was anyone can do. Originally, the book was planned from Victoria to the Queen, the late Queen Elizabeth II. And everyone assumes we live in one big castle together. Now, I had only met the late, great Queen twice in my whole life. Once, I was about 8, and, I was sort of presented to her, and I was so scared I curtsied rather than bowed, just didn't know what to. And the second time was at my mother's wedding at Windsor to my stepfather, and my sister and I had nipped out for a cigarette, I think, and we don't smoke anymore, but we at that time we were smoking and got lost, as you do in these great castles, and suddenly this unmistakable voice, you lost. I shouldn't do her voice. But anyway,
and the Queen,
and it was the Queen with all the corgis around her. Come on, follow me. And we were just like, mouths agape, like, wow. But, because she was a magnificent lady. But the thing was, it gave me one degree of separation from the book. And I think, she, it wasn't very high on her list of things she really cared about, I think. But I think my mother sort of said, oh, Tom, and it sort of just might have got the nod, because you have to have the nod.
Well, your mother, Camilla, Queen of England, currently, clearly raised you to enjoy food.
Hell yeah.
Because of how you are, and just if you're listening to this, Tom, to you talk about food, you were raised by somebody who really coveted, enjoyed food. So the dichotomy is clear because obviously Charles and his mother had a different relationship with food. The question is when you're with your mother and Charles and you're dining now, is there like a melding of the two ideas with food?
Not really. I mean, the thing is that it's my mother, she grew up, just like I've done with my children. Growing up, there's one thing cooking on a Saturday afternoon, watching the football, glass of wine, a proper slow braise, something really lovely, like a sort of sausage this time of year. So, well, not in New York, 'cause it's hot now, but, a sausage pasta or something like that. A nice slow cooked ragu. And that's cooking, which is friends coming over later. It's a Saturday, it's relaxing. Then you have the other one, which is cooking for 2 children. I don't like that, I don't like this. And you're cooking breakfast, lunch and dinner, and it becomes a bit of a chore. And I think with my mother, she was a good cook, but she never had any recipes. She wasn't a baker. It was very, very English, local, seasonal stuff that now, of course, is very trendy. But then that's how you ate in the country. We lived in the country, didn't really go out to restaurants, apart from in London, where there's a lot of Italian restaurants we went to.
No way. You didn't really go out to restaurants?
Not in the country. In London, we definitely did. But it was always Italian. I hadn't tasted Indian food until I was 13. I hadn't tasted Thai or even Chinese food properly. So this is when I found this. Oh my God, I found this. This is my food. But it was what we wanted. We didn't want the local free-range chicken from the farmer down the road. We wanted to go to the supermarket and have, all the horrible sort of chips and candy and horrible sauces and that sort of stuff. That's what we wanted. That for us was exotic. It was like going to the supermarket when it opened in Chippenham in Wiltshire, where we grew up. The Sainsbury's opened, and it was like that scene in Close Encounters, where the spaceship comes down. We were just like, this is the best place on earth. So yes, so growing up like that, my mother doesn't cook so much now, but so if she wants to go out to dinner, she'll say, oh, come over for dinner. We're like, oh no, should we go out? Purely because then we can go to all our favourite restaurants.
Yeah.
And I know the 5 or 6 that she likes. They know her, and she's always been in restaurants. I think when the king or when he goes out, it seems more of a thing because people aren't used to seeing him so much. I don't think my mother loves restaurants.
Yeah.
And it was a couple of times when you go out, people do that double take. They're walking past, he's so modest, and so he slips in and that is a massive double take.
I only know your mother from the show The Crown. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
And I mean, she comes off as quite erudite and quite funny, and you don't have to say you agree with everything on that show, but it's clearly she's done a great deal of for the family, for the royal family, becoming part of it. And when the three of you dine with Charles, what are you guys talking about at the dinner table?
Oh, food.
I love it, because you're the food critic. You're right. You're like the guy who knows food. You're the one sharing your opinions with everyone.
Well, not as much as the king does, because I'm not being oily here and going, sucking up. But it's absolute truth that the king is. Well, he knows more about rare breeds, about heritage varieties of apple. He knows more about farming, about sustainable farming systems, about regenerative farming systems, about, the differences of, he could tell the difference between a, Gloucester Old Spot and a Lop. And, he really is an expert. If he wasn't the king, dare I say, he'd be a very good food writer because he really knows and he really cares. So I can sit and have a conversation with him for half an hour about certain varieties of plum, because of course Victoria plum in the UK is the one named after his great grandmother, is the one we all use, and actually it's not the best plum. The Green Gage is the better. So I'll be saying, well, what about this one, and that's what I'll talk about. And so
I mean, Charles' tie to the environment and his ecology interests are profound, and he's done a great deal for educating the world about environmental problems over the course of time. Tom, let me ask you about the way Americans perceive the royal family. I think that you could probably clarify and clear up how do you think Americans get the royal family wrong?
Well, I mean, I really can't speak. I mean, I travel a lot to America because I love America and I love regional American food. And I think that sometimes there's an impression that everyone lives together in one big castle, which isn't true. I think that, the Crown, I've only seen one bit, and it annoyed me because it got my father so wrong that I thought, I'm not watching this. I can see its appeal, and lots of people read it, but I think you should treat it as a mixture of fact and fiction. I think The Crown.
For the record, the last two seasons were quite bad.
Were they? I haven't.
Quite bad.
I watched the first episode.
Incredible show, but the last two seasons were bad.
Really? By all accounts, friends who love it and say that it was at its best when there was quite a distance. So it was recreating the first episode I saw, and that was incredible. I think the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, and they were going to Africa or something.
Yeah, beautiful scenes.
And that
there
was wow, but I haven't really. I think, I don't know how Americans see the royal family. There's a huge amount of interest in the younger members of the royal family, I'd say, and you're America. There's a very interesting bit, putting it back to the book as usual, but this is indicative of when it was George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. So that was the Queen's mother, the late Queen's mother and father. FDR wanted them to come to America. Now, this is just before the war started, but the Nazi threat was coming across Europe, and everyone could see. And FDR saw this as a big threat. This will destabilize. He saw it early, but the problem is that having just been nearly ruined by the First World War, the last thing American people wanted was to get involved in another war across the Atlantic that had nothing to do with them, ostensibly. So there was very much a feeling of, Britain, they were our former colonial masters, and the royal family cold and distant, and, these sort of, what are they to us? But FDR was canny, and he understood how to use PR and how to use food as PR. So they came over, and he sort of hosted them in his house.
In Hyde Park.
Yep. And of course, he gave them hot dogs. Hot dogs and beer. Now, this was, I think the king said, how does one eat a hot dog sort of thing? And then he said, well, you just put it in your mouth and you chew it.
So that's George VI you're speaking about.
George VI, who was the late Queen's father. And this was just before World War II. And of course, the New York Times ran a headline saying king eats hot dog and asks for another. Now this, in that way of, as I call it, souffle diplomacy or soft diplomacy, softened the image of these fairly exotic, seemingly completely removed from a normal American's life, and it softened them. It softened the public view of the royal family. Afterwards, the king went to talk to FDR, and FDR just said, look, I'll give you some, if there are supply ships coming over the Atlantic, I will protect them. And it basically started.
It started the alliance that would, of course, win the war.
And that, for me, is the power of food. Food brings together. I mean, obviously, there's a recipe for hot dogs. Not that I'm going to tell any American how to have their hot dog, but there is a recipe for hot dog, and that's what the book I hope to do was not what you'd expect. Everyone expects lark's tongues, roast cygnet, caviar, fried bread. There's none of that in there. This is
it's also, to be clear, and you should pick the book up. It's about the history of food and food diplomacy. You could give one great example, but you go back in time and how food played a role in winning over the British people, but back in the day, or currently, food plays a role with social media as well, which you address.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Elizabeth II, Queen Elizabeth as we know her. She had a deep love of curry. But, British curry is quite different than something you might find in Kerala or you might find in Mumbai. But Tom, I wanted to ask you about her love of curry and this deep relationship between India and the UK.
Well, that started with Victoria to a certain extent. She was in the days of, love it or hate it or whatever. It was there, and she was the Empress of India. She never went out there, but her sons did. And she had a few Indian manservants, as they were called then, and they were dressed beautifully in blue. Now, they were very unpopular in the household for two reasons. One, basic old-fashioned racism. But two, a couple of the characters were quite tricky characters, So funnily enough, they were allowed to grind their own spices with old-fashioned, grinding stones, and allowed to kill the animals in the way that was prescribed by whether it was Hinduism or Islam. So this was incredible. In the Victorian kitchen, there were proper curries being made. Now, the ones that the Queen liked, Queen Victoria, and also her grandson, George V, loved them. And, of course, Queen Elizabeth loved them. There's not much chili in them.
Yeah.
They're very highly spiced, but they're very much of what I would call Anglo-Indian curries.
Spiced meaning flavor, spice not meaning heat.
Not meaning heat. So there was no chili at all in really any of them, apart from a bit of curry powder. But that reflects how when, for example, the partition of India, and we had huge amounts of immigration coming in from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. Now, the immigrants all open restaurants, realised our taste, the British taste wasn't like the Indian taste. We quite like things bland and boring and British. So they created curries like a Madras, a Vindaloo. And our Vindaloo is nothing like the Goan Vindaloo, which is wine and garlic and maybe pork and very, very good dish. But no, the Vindaloo is for the British, you're going to have 10 pints, then you pile into the curry house and have this, basically gravy with different levels of chili. But we love curries. Curry, there's a big difference in the UK between curry houses, which is a certain sort of food, and I love them. And you get all your bulties, which is which is a great Birmingham dish, and then you have now this great resurgence, thank the Lord, of regional Indian food.
Yeah,
so
regional.
Gymkhana Dishoom. Actually, I was talking to someone who loved Dishoom, this mini chain.
Yeah,
but we do have very good. Anyway, so the royal family did eat curries. But the late Queen Elizabeth, of course, didn't want chili in it, didn't like chili, but it was, and liked all the accoutrements, the raita and the chopped cucumber and the poppadoms.
Yeah.
And the fried onions. And I found this out. I didn't know, as I said, didn't know the late Queen at all, apart from being, we all loved her. From Mark Flanagan, so you go back to the Access. Yes, I did manage to speak to Mark Flanagan, who has spoken to a lot of people about, historians and the rest. But he obviously was royal chef, so cooked a lot for the Queen, and her tastes were very simple. I think after a long day of meeting a million people and the whole world, I think to the late
and she
Queen,
really enjoyed meeting with people.
I think
it's
so.
Obvious, yeah.
Yes, I think you can see. I'm certainly no expert on this, but she wanted something simple, as you probably would if, everyone's always trying to impress, so just like the whole world must have smelt like fresh paint to the late Queen, because everything was painted before you came, and the rich food, So to come back, and I think you'd want something like scrambled eggs on toast or a fish cake. And those are the recipes that I put in representing the late Queen, because she was, food was important to her, but she saw food, and this was according to Mark Flanagan, as something that you can really show your love and respect for somebody. So, for example, the state banquets. The two things have left over from the days of Victoria. There's tea, which we'll talk about later, and the state banquet. Now, the state banquet used to be 12 courses, and now it's 3, but it still has the pageantry, the pomp. It has the glittering gold and the glasses and the flowers and the footmen in red jackets. And, it doesn't matter if you're Barack Obama or the Emperor of Japan, it's still quite an impressive thing. Now, you don't talk about politics at this, but it's soft and souffle diplomacy. It's about looking after your honoured guests. And now the royal family don't choose who comes, so that's the government. So there's been some interesting characters.
Well, that dance between government and the crown is as old as time. It seems.
Well, it is
as old as the democracy.
And in the days, of course, of Victoria, she had absolute power.
Yeah, of course.
It's very.
So it's actually not the oldest time. It's as old as democracy.
No, and that was the thing. And so these banquets, the Queen used to remember. So Mark Flanagan, royal chef, would send up 4 menus for her. And the first thing is it'd always be in French, because state banquets are always in French, because still we hold on to this idea that French food is the grandest and the most intricate and the most the rest of it. And she was so fluent in French, she got a mistake with an accent or anything like that, that'd be ring like a teacher and sent back. And the second thing, she had this incredible memory, apparently, the late Queen, for remembering. So she would look and think, well, we're having dinner for the. I'm not going to do a voice.
You can do Victoria.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
But this was the late Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, this is Elizabeth Jones.
And she would look at menus and think, now we've got the Emperor of Japan coming. Now, I remember 20 years ago, he loved this dish. So she had this incredible recall, and this is about her understanding of the power of the state banquet, and the emperor, the prime minister, the president, whoever was at the banquet would go, man, we had this last time. Yes, I thought you might like it. It was that attention to detail that was so important. And also talking to Mark about the dietary needs. Of course, kings and princes and prime ministers and presidents, they're all surrounded by their entourages and all have their own tastes. Yeah. So, of course, Mark would be speaking to his equivalent with whoever it was when they're coming. What does he or she like? Does she not like? And so everything was totally tailored in terms of food.
And it's absolute hospitality to the core. And I think a lot of American hospitality in some ways is informed by the royal family. I think that we obviously pick up some traditions here in the States.
Well, then there's a brilliant book I read by a guy, I'm sure you've read it, and it's about the food of the presidents. By a guy called Alex Prudhomme.
Yeah, he's been on the show twice, actually. He's a friend of the show.
I read that and I absolutely loved it. I've quoted him in the book, and the FDR does come. But I love the fact of different presidents, what they ate, how they ate. And that, for me, you go back to Brillat Savarin, show me what you eat, and I'll tell me what you eat, and I'll show you what you are. That does, because you can get into the soul of some, especially a president, looking at Nixon's very depressing sort of, food. And it was, and the sort of, the Kennedy bringing the glamour to those. And it was just, I found that one of the most fascinating books I read last year, really. And it really informed.
And you probably saw some things familiar, especially some of our earlier presidents.
Absolutely.
And the way that the crown, the celebration, I think our state dinners are obviously informed by royal banquets, right? The style of the service.
Absolutely. But reading the menus, and again, it's works of art sometimes about how it's entertained. And of course, in America, you've got all the movie stars in the state. I mean, we've got a few as well, not so much movie stars, but you can really sort of.
Hey man, I love that show, Industry.
Oh my God, love it.
Greatest show on television. Coming from your home.
That is very good. That is a
good show.
That is definitely one that is pretty hardcore, but it is brilliant. Great electro soundtrack as well.
Absolutely. The needle drops on that show. I mean, bringing in Depeche. I mean,
yeah, I know. I went to Depeche concert. When was it? A few months ago. They're absolutely
Tom. How do you what's the pregame before Depeche for you? What are you drinking? Some champagne? Or are you doing
Depeche? No, we went. It was in O2, which is a long way. I live in West London.
Yeah.
I was hoping they're going to do a lot of Krautrock, the 80s stuff. I love that, sort of. And then
great era of Depeche, Tom.
Great era. I love that
Depeche.
Era. And we went and we probably had a few drinks and danced a bit and sung a bit. But yes, it was fascinating. But yeah, no, sorry, on Depeche.
We could talk about Depeche all day and Industry.
And Industry. But yes, it was. But you look at, I mean, for example, the American dream for me made real are these two great German immigrants, the hamburger and the hot dog. And in they come with very little. They come as a hamburger, steak and a wurst, and they conquer not just America, but they come back and conquer the world. I also, the idea of red sauce Italian cooking, of this thing that obviously when all the immigrants came into America, in the 20s and 1910s, 20s, there was, they were coming from incredibly poor parts of the South. Meat was such a luxury. And then, of course, they come to the land of abundance, and then you get this wonderful cuisine. And I haven't been to a state yet where I haven't found lots of things that Calvin Trillin's my god, really.
Oh, yeah. Man.
And the Tummy Trilogy for me was and I find between A.J. Liebling and Trillin and MFK Fisher, and Joseph Mitchell when he's writing up at the
oh, cool.
I like sort of New Yorker, the New Yorker sort of style. They informed when I first started loving food, which I mean I've loved food forever. First started getting into,
but you love the word. You like you're very literate. You're very read, and you like the writing of food as much as the actual food, which is rare. I think some food writers just like the food. They don't actually like the history of food writing.
Oh, everything's context. And I've said this before, and this. Food is merely a prism through which we see history, which we see economics, we see sociology, we see food is health, wealth, and happiness. But conversely, it's also it pushes people apart. I remember once years ago I was in Beirut. Very sad what's happened there. I mean, beyond sad. Sorry, I'm being really. And there was a wonderful restaurant, and it was called Tao something. I'll find out what it was. Tao. Anyway, what was happening was that they were bringing not only all the regions, the ladies who cooked all the regions of the Lebanon and all around there in Syria coming in, but also from Jerusalem, and it was bringing people together, breaking bread together. And, you feel that if only there was more sitting down, doesn't matter of your religion or your views, and sitting down and breaking bread. And that's the most fundamental thing, the uniting power of the table.
You've mentioned the regionality of Indian cuisine. You've mentioned the regionality of Lebanese cuisine, and I have to ask you about the regionality of English cuisine. My grandfather was born in Liverpool, and I remember my mom telling me about some of the hard-boiled meals that he'd had in the States. Yeah,
love scouse.
Absolutely, and I've never really spent time in Liverpool, and certainly I'd like to go to Sunderland. I could name a lot of cities. Tom, briefly. We could do a whole episode about this, but how does England divide itself with food?
Well, I suppose the basic answer is that red or brown is the first thing. I mean, that is what you put on your bacon sandwich, your bacon roll, your bacon butty. Is it red, which is tomato ketchup, or is it brown, which is HB sauce, which is it's a sort of fruity, sort of Indian tinge, it's named after the Houses of Parliament. Now, battles will rage over which one, and sometimes some people in the north will have red and some in the south. That's a basic. I think English regional food, there's some great books about English regional food. We lost our way. English food British food has this reputation across the world as grim and greasy and boring and overcooked and just without, and still people ha. But great British food is about ingredients first. So, for example, the perfect, a grouse or something, a game bird in autumn, or asparagus in spring. But not just that, really good steaks, really good roasts, really good puddings. People like Fergus Henderson at St. John have done a huge amount he doesn't call it modern British cooking. He would say, I'm more influenced by Masala Hassan than I am by Jane Grigson, for example, because his plating is very Italian. But he's all about nose to tail, which any chef in every culture, of course, eats every part of the beast.
If you go to St. John on Brick Lane for an afternoon
and
lunch.
Also, and you don't move. I mean, you have bone marrow with your bone marrow salad, and it's wonderful. And it sort of really put life back into traditional British food. But there's a place called Wilton's that's very grand. You have to wear a suit. It's one of my favorite restaurants. Oyster season, you're going to have 24 native oysters, which are just so elegant, followed by a jellied consommé, which I love, and then maybe a mixed grill or kidneys, or a really good steak from a sort of well brought up cow. And they have a roast trolley every day. So one day it's beef, next day it's pork with crackling. So that when I have friends, mainly American actually, who come over, I say, these, and they're both, well, St. John isn't as expensive as Wilton's, but these are two very different facets of British food. Then fish and chips, of course. Now, fish and chips, everyone will argue who's the best fish and chips. There's regional differences, for example, and I get this wrong, and every Yorkshire and Lancashire person will get furious, but I think it's Lancashire is haddock. I'm just waiting to hear the outrage when I get it.
We're going to get
and Yorkshire is cod. Yeah. And, in Yorkshire traditionally, chips are fried in beef dripping, which is the best.
Yeah.
But really, you don't get good fish and chips in London. You have to go to the coast or up to Scotland where they do it very well. Wales do it well. But, it's something to eat with your legs dangling as you're sitting looking at the rain on the sea.
What does a good fish and chips plate, a quality plate, look like to you?
First of all, you wouldn't, you would have it in paper. So you'd get this warm bundle and it smells of vinegar. The chips, which are fat chips, they're not triple fried. They're not fried. They're not fries. They're chips. So there's crisp bits and there's soggy bits. They're covered in salt and vinegar, obscene amounts of salt and vinegar. But the fish, and the batter should be, the oil should be clean. And the fish should steam inside the batter.
Yes.
So there's no greasiness. And when you eat it with your fingers, really, and you sort of pull it apart, again, some people leave the skin on, some leave it off, but it should be absolute sort of fat, pearlescent flakes of very, very fresh fish encased in this burnished, beautiful batter. And that is something transcendentally good, I think.
Oh,
when
you're
it's
right.
good.
We covet a great, that first bite when you know you have the steam down and it's actually properly cooked, properly seasoned within, that the fish is steamed and seasoned, the batter is crispy. And, you know, we as Americans like to throw some tartar sauce on our fish and chips. What do you think about that move?
happens. I don't mind that at all. I'm fairly sort of open-minded and
I like
not,
it.
you know, you're allowed. There's restaurant fish and chips. So if you go to Scott's or you go to the Ivy or whatever, then you'll have, it's different somehow. It's got to be eaten, you know, because when we were kids, that's one thing we did have with my mother. We'd go off to the Chippy on Friday, you know, and you'd sit and that hot package on and you'd sneak a few chips as you were doing it. And the other thing the British, very regional, is snacks. So I think we're brilliant at corn-based snacked. Not so much chips. We got really nice chips. I mean, talking about American chips rather than. But
I follow.
We have Monster Munch, we have Scampi Fries, we have Frazzles, we have Knickknacks, we have Space Invaders. Our corn-based snack market is, I think, one of the best in the world, and I would defend that.
You call them crisps.
We call them crisps, even if they're potato-based, corn-based. Crisps and our chocolate and candy. I would fight all over the world. I think that Maltesers are possibly the greatest sweets.
I love the fighting words. Yeah, I mean, I'm more of a Reese's peanut butter cup guy. But you know, Cadbury, you know, throws a pretty strong right, I must say.
See, Hershey's, I can't be dealing with Hershey's chocolate. I don't know what it is. I'm just not American, perhaps. But it's always Cadbury's over Hershey's.
No, I think of course, like the Hershey's dark chocolates. Nah, we don't need that. We want a Cadbury in our life. What about a town in England? Just a town that you think we should maybe give a closer look as Americans for the food.
Bristol.
You said it so fast. I love it.
Straight through. I'm a West Country boy. I was born in the West. The West is the best. Bristol is possibly the fourth or fifth biggest city, but it is down in the West Country, and it has a thriving food scene. I mean, look, Manchester's fantastic. Liverpool's beautiful. It's got some good restaurants. Birmingham's great. But for me, Bristol, I'm always going down there, and you're finding everything from Michelin-star stuff to the best Sri Lankan to sort of fish and chips. It's a really independent. Bristolians see themselves as, you know, if a train comes down from London and opens there, they just kick it out. They're not interested in London. And it's got a great club scene. It's got a great.
It feels like a little like Philadelphia.
Yes,
I'm just drawn because like Philly is so local. They kick out chains.
Exactly,
it's a little bit underappreciated.
It is that, and being the West Country, of course, there's very good cheeses and dairy and great, you know, all the fields, so great meat. But Bristol, I go down there about once a month with a friend of mine called Mark, and who lives there, and he's always finding, this place is opening, and you know, for example, the Mexican. We've never had good Mexican. We've never had enough Mexicans in the UK to have good Mexican, but it's changing. So Santiago Lastra, he's got a star for Cole, maybe not two. Anyway, at long last, Mexican food for me is one of the great cuisines of the world. It's up there with French, Chinese, Indian.
It's two of us.
It's the best,
truly
isn't it?
One of
regional.
the best.
And so I try and get there once a year, whether it's to Oaxaca or Guerrero or the Yucatan, and I just love Mexican. And it's just the food, and we're just beginning to get Mexican. Same with Thai food as well, in that just like with Indian food, everything was doled down. It became oversweet and turgid and boring, you know, a green curry that tasted like a sort of candy bar. Now, of course, there's Isan and there's Southern. I want my head.
You're starting to get the regional guys. I think New York is having an incredible Thai boom
we're
going to see for the next 5 years. I have to go back to Manchester as an aside. Did you ever go to the Hacienda in like the early 90s?
I was a big raver, but I spent many a time in a warehouse or a field dancing to repetitive beats, and very happily so. Never went to the Hacienda. So if I was, let me see, I started raving when I was about 16, 17, so that would have been 92, 93. So it was coming to the end. You know, the first, I was a second Summer of Love. The first Summer of Love, you know, but of course it was the DJs there, the Graham Parks, and of course you had the Happy Mondays, and you had, you know, it was an incredible Manchester. I was up there last week and found this just a friend of mine called Tom Hetherington. This is a great Manc, and he always said, "Well, you've got to try this and that." And Manchester again, they're much friendlier up north than they are in London. And Manchester has a thriving food scene as well. But I went to a really good place, which is a French bistro, actually, in a sort of not very cool, up and coming part of town.
I love that. I love to hit some of these towns. Blur or Oasis? There is only one right answer.
I would
Just
say
saying.
I don't know. It's difficult. It's like asking just like Sophie's Choice. It's not like
It
Sophie's
is.
Choice.
It is. It's
I
unfair.
love Oasis, and I think they're brilliant for swagger.
Yeah.
But I like, Beetle Bum. I do like Blur. And Alex James is a cheesemaker.
I was gonna say Alex James is a cheesemaker. Please come on the show, Alex James.
He's
got
16
times.
Well, he's got a book out. So I mean, he's a very, very nice man. He lives down in the country, and I know him well. So that's why I probably say, because I love Alex, and so it'd probably be just.
That is the correct answer. Ding, 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 ding. You got the correct answer. I think Blur is clearly the superior band. And
I went to see them last summer at Wembley. Was it last summer? They were brilliant. They've got 10 hits. I mean, I saw them at Glastonbury as well, but they're just fantastic. But then again, Oasis.
Modern Life is Rubbish is, I think, the best album.
Oh, absolutely amazing.
That's probably the one for me.
But if you think Oasis will dominate the world with these, I mean, they sold out into it sort of broke the internet when they.
It's game over. Oasis is definitely the bigger band now with this reunion tour. But
that'd be a big, and they're obviously coming over here to Mexico City. They're coming to New York. They're coming to LA. I thought, they're doing the big city.
The Alex James memoir is quite good.
Absolutely brilliant.
I love his, and then he has the book about cheese making in the Cotswolds, which I've read as well.
Yeah.
So I really want to have him on the show because I'm a huge fan of his work.
He's the nicest man in the world. He loves cheese.
I love it.
He really loves cheese.
Tom, on This Is Taste, we ask guests about their discerning taste. So to close this interview, here's a little rapid fire, fast and furious taste check. Are you ready?
Yes.
The best fruit.
British strawberries at the peak of summer.
Oh, when is that?
Oh gosh, so we're talking June to about end of August.
So Wimbledon era.
Wimbledon,
time.
ask at Wimbledon, they sort of start, and then you don't want them once they're not British anymore, not for some stupid jingoistic reason, but they're just not their sweetest and fattest.
I love it. The worst vegetable.
Swede.
Yeah.
A Swede turnip. Listen, I realise it's fodder and it has its place, but I don't even like parsnips. They're big with Sunday roast and they're too sweet for me. I like a bit of savouriness in my vegetables.
Yeah, that's a great call. The best dessert.
Ooh, gosh. I would say, I found out in another book I did a few years ago that sticky toffee pudding, which is not actually a British dessert.
No way.
It's Canadian. I traced its roots back to Canada, but I would say sticky toffee pudding or a treacle sponge, a big whack of light sponge with lots of treacle all over it.
So the Eton mess is like big in the States.
Is it?
I've been seeing it. I actually had one in California. Had one in New York. Yeah, it's big.
Is it? I've never saw. I went to that school. I never saw it there. But it's a nice dessert as well. Yeah, I like that as well. Or pavlova, an Aussie one. But treacle sponge, I think.
I love that. Okay, a restaurant you are most excited to visit in the world?
You know what? Going back to Mexico or Thailand, it would be just, whether it's in Mexico City, a taco stand with a big queue, and you think, oh, wow, they're doing that chorizo. Oh, they're doing the sort of El Pastor there. And you've read about it and you're desperate. And same with Thailand, I was down with David Thompson, who wrote for me one of the great food books of all time, Thai food, and he speaks Thai and his husband's Thai. So going with him and traveling with him, and that I get excited about tiny noodle stalls and stuff. That's what, Noma, Fat Duck, all fantastic, all part of everything. But really, when it comes down to it, I get excited about getting balls deep into a food culture on the street.
I love that. A restaurant you wish could come back from the dead.
In the UK, there was a great restaurant. There's a very important restaurant in the 80s called Kensington Place that Roly Lee, a fantastic chef, along with the River Cafe, along with Bibendum, showed that in London those days were either very cheap or very expensive. It was either, Michelin, the Gavroche or the Ritz, or, fish and chips. And it showed that you could have good food, but yet be relaxed. You didn't have to wear a suit. They were really, really important. So I would like to, and I sort of grew up there. So
yeah, it's like a family.
It's a family place. And so Kensington Place would be great. But there's a few, what's the oldest one in New York? Was it Delmonico's?
Yeah, Delmonico's is like one of the oldest in the country down in Wall Street.
Is it still going?
Yeah, definitely still open.
Because I've seen the old menus and that was
the menus are cool. I haven't been in years, but it's still there. Your favorite city outside the UK to visit for food?
That would be between Bangkok and Mexico City.
Yeah.
I would Tokyo, but no, it'd be between Mexico City.
Last one. And this is important because your people invented this. Your favorite sandwich?
Well, I have a lot of time for a proper, and there's recipes in the back of the book, lots of recipes for sandwiches in the book. Really good ham and mustard with lots of butter. I like that very much. I might have to be controversial and go French and say ham en beurre. A really good baguette with an inch of cold, creamy butter, gherkins, and thick cut, really good ham.
Absolutely love the gherkin inclusion of that one. Tom Parker Bowles, what a pleasure. I really love this conversation. Thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
Thank you so much for having me. As ever, with people who love food, I could bang on for hours with you. But anyway, thank you very
Thanks,
much.
buddy. Hey, it's Matt here. This is usually where we do three things. Liza's usually sitting across from me, and we're doing some banter. We're talking about our weekends. We're talking about our weeks. Eliza's on vacation. She's in Taiwan. So I am going to do a monopod. A monopod. Everyone does monopods these days. And I'm one of them. And I wanted to talk about my recent trip to London, where I was visiting friends, and I got to visit some amazing restaurants, one cultural institution. And I'd been there a year ago, and really, I just want to keep going back and back to London. It's one of my favorite cities to visit. Such an international city, that's an understatement. And really, I love the way this city changes every 5 years. And I really caught it at a cool time, right after the holidays. I love traveling internationally the first week of January if I can. I feel like that is the time when hotel prices are low and really the streets are empty and you can get reservations at restaurants. And I got a great a lineup here. So off the plane, I was able to make a return stop to St. John Bread and Wine, just off Spitalfields Market. Classic Fergus Henderson restaurant. It is truly my favorite restaurant in London, having not been a regular visitor, but really when I go, I try to make it there. What did I have? Okay, I had an incredible hunk of smoked mackerel and some dilly potato salad. Oh my God. So much mackerel on this trip, it'll make it a return appearance. This chicken liver too, and I have to say I've had some chicken liver in my day, and the way this was kind of spread across this crusty bread, this toast, it was a work of art. I loved the way the texture was just perfect, and it had a single brandied prune and some cornichons on the side. Really love that. Poached cod with some purple sprouting broccoli. Fish. Another theme you're going to hear on this. And of course, I went with the desserts, and I want to tap in one day and figure out what is up with the St. John double baked chocolate cake, because it is a work of art. I did some deep Reddit searching last night. I looked on some boards. People love this dish. I'm sure the recipe is there. I think my takeaway was that it's very hard to make, and it was topped with a kind of a really sour creme fraiche. I think we call that sour cream in the States, but really it was a perfect pairing. And the texture of this double baked chocolate cake it's so light inside but rich. It doesn't lack that body of like a really solid chocolate cake, a fudgy cake, and so it had this like light texture and deep rich chocolate flavor. Loved that. I also went to Maison Francaise, near St. James Square in Buckingham, and this was a recommendation from Colin Nagy of the great Why Is This Interesting newsletter and Man About Town. He has great recommendations. I hope to have Colin into the studio this year. It's been something that we've been talking about for a while. Thank you for the rec, Colin, because we went to this place, Maison Francaise, and, this appears to be a bit of a power lunch spot. I think of it maybe like Michael's in New York or like even JG, you do some business there. And we rolled in at 9 a.m. on a Monday, and the dining room was empty. And I love that when you can go to a dining room and see the space and have nobody bumping up against you. Simple breakfast of just croissants, eggs, and granola. I mean, the food was pretty good. Nothing worth noting, but I just loved this restaurant, and it begged a lot of questions. Like, what is this place? What is Maison Francaise? Is this the place that that business goes down in London? There's a bar downstairs. It's a massive restaurant. So I'm gonna head back during the day or even evening on my next trip. Okay, a pause from the restaurants. And this was a great recommendation from Eliza. She was like, if you're going to London, go to Barbican Centre, get the tour. I booked it. It's actually kind of hard to book. I mean, I had to book like weeks in advance. This structure is incredible. It is a modern brutalist masterpiece. And later this month, we are going to be talking about another brutalist masterpiece back in the States, the Salk Institute in San Diego. Liza and I was able to visit there, but we love brutalist architecture here. The Barbican is, a little bit of history. It's the home of the London Symphony. There's movie premieres there. It's a performing arts center, in the large halls. But really what it is a residential center. There's, I think, like 1,700 residents or units there. And for me, walking around, getting this 2-hour tour, and seeing this architecture that is purely functional. The interiors that we get to peek into are incredible. And if you watch the show The Agency, the U.S. version, the main character has an apartment at the Barbican, and you can see him hanging out on the terraces, which they have in many of the two large towers. There's also lower structures that have really cool courtyard views, and we got to walk into the courtyard. And I just have to say, this is such a great walking tour, a docent tour. Head there. Okay, back to restaurants. Rochelle Canteen in Shoreditch. I checked in with a couple friends. This seemed to be on the list of many. So we went, and it was a nice, I would say, segue from St. John. There's certainly an overlap there. It was opened in 2004 by Melanie Arnold and Margot Henderson, the wife of Fergus Henderson. And Margot's a New Zealand born chef of great acclaim. And this restaurant really delivered. I mean, it's 20 years old, and it feels like it's such a classic London spot now. And, it's kind of hidden away in Shoreditch in a courtyard. And what did we have? We had roasted Sutton Hoo, which I didn't know this breed of chicken, this style of chicken. Delicious with turnips, bacon, and really like a chimichurri. I loved that. It was so simple. We tried some pumpkin mulligatawny, a beautiful skate with capers and lemons, and I thought it was a classic, I would say the modern British cuisine, or new British cuisine, if it wants to be a dovetail or segue from new American cuisine, I would call it that. Terrific recommendation. Another restaurant, Rambutan in Borough Market, my return visit. I love this restaurant. Cynthia has been on the show, the chef owner. She published an incredible cookbook 2 years ago called Rambutan. Alex Lau shot the photos, and I love that cookbook. It's definitely one of my favorites. We're thinking about doing a big cookbook project. It is the 25th year of the 21st century. That's a little bit of a hint. I got to talk to Eliza about this one, but we might be going back and looking at some classic books of the past 25 years. Stay tuned for that, because I believe Rambutan will be on the list. But really, I got to have a quick lunch there. Love it. Solo lunch at the bar. Borough Market on a Saturday. Please don't go there ever. Oh my God, that was such a mistake. Such a newbie tourist move. Couldn't even get in. That's fine. Got to have a great lunch. Had a couple dishes. Smoked haddock white curry with fenugreek and winter tomatoes. I love when tomatoes are stewed down in this like bowl of curry with this really beautiful haddock, which was smoky and flaky, and I had a little naan on the side. And I scooped it up. I loved that, and I also had a terrific cheese toasty, maybe cheesy toasty. Called, I don't know if you want to add vowels to the beginning of it, but it had a great sambal on it. Really rich in the center. Toasties are, of course, legend in the UK, and I think I had a few toasties. This was my favorite. Rambutan and Borough Market, definitely go there. It's kind of a tough reservation at night at times, but I think lunch was great. Just walked in. Again, first week of January, great time to visit places like London, New York into February. I was booking a table for a restaurant tonight, and we're recording this on a weekday. And wow, it was easy to find a restaurant reservation right now. This is the time to hit those spots. Okay, away from the restaurants, I checked out this photo show at the Photographer's Gallery in that little corridor of photography. I would say there's a museum, there's a couple galleries, but this is one of the bigger ones, this museum. And I think Craig Maude had posted this on his stories a few months ago, and I was like, I got to check this out. Letizia Battaglia, Life, Love, and Death in Sicily. What an incredible show. Now, Letizia is a famous photojournalist, having shot in Sicily throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and if you can use the clues, there is murder. There is a lot of murder in these images, and she's shooting covers for Panorama and many of the major dailies across Europe, and covering this rash of violence that Sicily saw in the 70s and 80s. And what a ballsy and bold photojournalist, but what an artistic eye. And I have to say, of course, there's death in these images, but I took great pleasure in seeing some of the other images that didn't involve death, that involved the people of Sicily. Her portraiture is just incredible. And Letizia Battaglia, what a legend. I have one more restaurant to mention, and it was quite the highlight. And Priyanka Matu had told me about this spot, and it was her favorite, and it did not disappoint. Pally Hill in Soho, Chef Avi Shashidara, I think I'm getting that right, is the chef there. Avi worked at River Cafe before opening this restaurant a few years back. It is a menu that spans the subcontinent of India. So I had some dosas with this beautiful sambar. It's like root vegetable sambar with turmeric potatoes and tomato chutney. The papadi chaat. I mean, when papadi chaat hits, I think it's one of my favorite dishes in all the world. You know, that it's got the yogurt, and at the bottom, it's really, really fresh and cool. But it has, you know, delicatessen pumpkin in this one, some tomatoes, of course, pomegranate with a little bit of herbs on top, mint and tamarind. And of course a chutney, and wow, it was such a pleasure. Just like, I think it was the first dish that we got, and we were just like digging in. But I think probably the highlight was the tandoori chicken tikka. I mean, tandoori chicken, obviously we all know what that is, but this one was special. Really, really tender, really perfectly cooked, deeply flavorful, served with a mint salad, a little bit of grated fresh horseradish on top. Wow, Pally Hill delivered. I hope to go back there. I know they do tasting menus. We did a la carte, and that's in Soho. But yeah, general thoughts about London. Again, like, what a cool restaurant city. You know, Guys tells you London is cool. I guess that's what we're doing here. But really, I think of it as one of our great evolving cities. And I always read Vittles when I can. Jonathan and crew there are hitting the deep cuts. I know I hit some more classic spots, and I wasn't able to make it to Brixton, which I wanted to check out some spots there. But next visit, I will make sure to hit that up. But you know, you should book that flight, and if you got like any points or anything, you can get over there in the winter. It's a great time to visit. Weather might not be great, but who cares when you're inside eating at restaurants. That's me going solo. I wish Eliza was here across to like talk about her style of dining in London. She goes there a little bit more frequently than me. She will be back in February. But thank you for listening. Appreciate it. This is Taste is hosted by Eliza Abarbanel and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things that are happening.